Singapore has taken top spot as Asia's safest city for the first time. The Economist Intelligence Unit's 2021 Safe Cities Index also saw Singapore score third globally. The index ranked 60 cities worldwide along 5 security pillars. While Singapore was second for digital, health and infrastructure security, it dropped from its top spot for personal security in 2019 to 13th place this year. Under the new environmental pillar added to this year's index, Singapore ranked 37th. The EIU explained that while most cities have strong environmental policies, few have achieved visible results due to a host of challenges, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. And for more on this, we're joined by Pratima Singh, Project Director of this year's index. Pratima, thanks for joining us. Firstly, was Singapore's top spot in Asia expected?
Thanks very much, Steve. Very happy to be here. Yes, Singapore, we know, has done quite well consistently. As you rightly mentioned, I want to start by explaining a little bit about the index. So this is the EIU's 4th Safe Cities iteration. We publish this every alternate year. And we've covered 60 cities this year across 76 indicators and sub-indicators that are categorized into 5 pillars: digital, health, infrastructure, personal, and environmental. And as you rightly mentioned, we've included environmental security as a new pillar this year. Singapore has done consistently well across all of these pillars. However, of course, they've done most, at least in terms of relative, they've had a really strong performance in the first 3 on digital, health, and infrastructure. All of this was expected, even when it comes to personal and health, personal and environment, where we talk about it and dig into those findings a little bit more. It has done better than average still.
Well, let's talk about the newly included pillar of environmental security. We ranked, 37th there? I'm wondering, can we tell whether that's a positive thing or not, or whether there are areas and elements that we need to improve on?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the environmental pillar was we thought it was critical to include it this year as a new pillar, just because we've seen a lot of importance on this, and we've had aspects of it in other pillars through the years, but we thought it was very important to include it as a standalone to highlight the importance of environmental safety and security and how that links to urban safety more generally. And so by including it as a separate standalone pillar, what we were able to do is really categorize and dissect this a little bit and be able to analyze where cities are doing well and where they're falling short. And one of the things I want to point out is we categorize even the pillars into inputs and outputs. So the inputs are essentially policies or drivers that are determining the outcomes or the outputs. So what we've seen in the environmental pillar, and this is true across all our 60 cities, is generally we've seen that cities tend to have a strong input and not quite a strong output quite yet. And so essentially what we're seeing is that many cities, and Singapore included, have good policies in place and drivers. However, we are yet to achieve many of those outcomes that we've laid out, and therefore we need to prioritize implementation. And this means that we need to kind of take an interesting approach, something that we're already doing, but we need to make sure that we're not thinking in silos anymore. And we need to be able to take sort of a whole of government, whole of stakeholder approach to this, work closely with different sectors, and also critically work closely with consumers and society at large in order to be able to implement some of these things. We really essentially need to focus on engaging different stakeholders and players in order to execute and achieve some of those targets.
And is that approach of inputs and outputs also transferable to Singapore's ranking in personal security, which saw a dip this time round?
That's right, yes. So I do want to start by highlighting that we have made methodological changes in the index this year, and that translates into certain new additions into the personal security pillar as well. So rather than just looking at it as physical violence only, we've expanded the definition of personal security to include things like economic security, whether it's expenditure on social security, people in vulnerable jobs and essentially occupations, and also gender metrics. We really deepened this to include gender insecurity as well. And so essentially that translation between inputs and outputs is slightly different, but yes, does translate into Singapore's 13th position in this year's ranking. We won't say it's a drop. We will say that it's because of methodological changes that there's been a bit of a reordering as a result. However, interestingly, what we found is that Singapore has done quite well on the outputs in personal security. So in fact, it's doing well in terms of making sure that the residents and population is safe without having to depend much on essential policies. And the reason for that we've seen is because there is a certain social cohesion. There's a connectedness where you see that the society is also taking into account a certain responsibility that translates into increased security, at least at a personal level.
All right, thank you for talking us through it. Pratima Singh from the Economist Intelligence Unit.